Today on the podcast, I'm looking forward to chatting with Matt Brown. You may have heard him on the podcast before. We had an interview a few years back, but I'm excited to have you back today, Pastor Matt, to get a little bit more up close and personal.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be on your show. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So as you know, we talk through on-air counseling sessions, like what's going on in your life and what have you been through? What do you need to process today? But for those, before we get into that kind of conversation, for those who don't know who you are or what you're about, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah. So I'm a pastor here in Southern California. I think you've been out near us to Saddleback a couple times.
Yeah.
So we're a multi-site campus. So people always are like, "Where's your church?" And I'm like, all over the place. So we have 14 campuses in California. My wife and I started it in 1997 in our living room. It's
Wow.
huge. We had about 50,000 people at Easter last weekend. It was crazy. So I'm an author, which is great because I'm dyslexic. I don't know if I told you that last time. So
No.
yeah, so I've written my second book, and I wanted to write it, because a lot of people don't write their books now; they hire a writer,
Yeah.
and
Right.
so I
Right.
really felt like for me, my book was about miracles. So I wanted, I thought, what a testimony to a miracle if I could write a book. So I just finished my second book. We got three kids. My daughters are married. We're loving it, and my son is 21, and we are still holding our breath. So
I love that.
that's rough. So
I
young men,
know.
raising young men. Whew, so
So two boys and a girl,
two girls and a boy. Sorry.
two girls and a boy.
My daughters are both married.
Okay, got it. And then
Yeah.
your son is still at home with you guys?
He's at college, 21.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Amazing. I have three boys and a girl.
Okay.
The girl helps to balance things out.
Yeah.
It's amazing though that you're in that season of life and empty nesters in a way and just navigating
Yeah.
all that you guys have done together as a couple. Okay, so let's be real. Church planting, church growth, dealing with people in ministry in general can sometimes seem so glamorous when you look at it on Instagram. Like, wow, look at all those people that they're reaching, and look at that platform, and look at the influence that they get to have. But
Hmm.
it doesn't come without a cost.
Right.
There's a sacrifice to it. There's an emotional toll that it takes, a spiritual toll that it takes, a personal toll that it takes. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with difficult situations, you're on a platform and you're getting, and basically it's like you're living in a fish tank and everyone is
Yeah.
watching you and how you live your life. And
Hmm.
so I'm just curious to know, how has that impacted you personally over the last, how many years did you say since you started your church?
It's been 27 years this year.
27 years. So what has that
Yeah.
felt like for you and your family?
I would say like a roller coaster, great highs and great lows. Moments of thrill and moments of like, are we going to die on this thing? It's been a lot. So, um, I think that, one of the stories I tell in my book, Miracles, is I was diagnosed. I was having throat problems when I first was preaching, and
Yeah.
it just, obviously something was wrong. So I went to the doctor. Eventually, they did an MRI and they found a growth in my larynx, and the doctor said it might be cancer. I flipped out. I didn't handle it well. I was like, I think I was 32, and I took 10 days into Palm Springs on a vow of silence, left my wife with three little kids at home with the word cancer hanging in the air. And I
Yeah.
remember the Sunday before I left, this young man came up to me and he said, and so I shared with the church my story. I think I might have cancer. Please pray for me this week. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I just don't know where our church is going. I'm not sure if I can stay here. And I
Wow.
remember thinking, oh, you don't care at all about me. Like it was like this. And and the reality is for anybody that's thinking about going into ministry, like whatever wounds you have, they will not be healed in ministry. They'll be exposed.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, these people are here because of their brokenness, and I need to figure out how to deal with mine. And so that was the first thing. And that family, good friends of mine from college, left our church because I took a sabbatical and some time off, and he was just a little concerned about the direction of our church, and I was concerned about my life. Uh,
Yeah.
Now ultimately God did an amazing miracle. That's why the books on miracles is when I had surgery, I did a prayer. And I grew up Baptist. I don't know what you grew up, but like I believe in miracles in the Bible, but I never thought like I would see one.
Yeah.
And so I had surgery, and the doctor said afterwards, I woke up and I says, "Was the surgery a success?" And he said, "No," but he was smiling, which I thought was odd. And he said, "We found no tumor." And I said, "How could that be?" And he said, "You tell me. You're a pastor."
Wow.
So yeah, so God has been there miraculously for me, but it has been a journey. It's been hard, I'll tell you, Deborah, on my wife and on my kids, really, really hard. Because in church, I'm not just a pastor; I'm the CEO, right? But I got to feel bad because it's a business. Like everyone else gets to run a business, but I have to feel guilty because I have to run a
Right.
business. But the state of California sees me as a business. My employees get vacation, retirement, right? All of the positives of the business, but I have to lead as a CEO, as a pastor, which I want to, but that's challenging. It's really, really challenging. And so that's been like this for us.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
and it's been great, but it's been hard and hard on my kids. And just years ago, Rick Warren said, I know you've spoken at Saddleback Church. He said being a megachurch pastor is like it's like watching a parade and you just wave at the people as they go by, but that takes the toll on you. And this last 4 years, with the Cal Exodus, like 30% of our church moved out of state in 18 months. I've never seen anything like it. I think it happened in
Wow.
the Dust Bowl when everybody left Oklahoma and Texas, but so many of our friends and family just left. And and they do it for good reasons, right? Deborah, for our family. And I'm thinking, well, I have a family.
Right.
you know
Right.
so but we're called here, and just processing that with the Lord. Okay, Lord, you've called us here, haven't you? Right? I told one pastor, I said, I feel like God's called me to be a general, but my whole army's leaving. So do I stay? It's so processing that.
That
So
is hard.
that's where I've been for the last couple of years. And and our state is crazy. I mean, I can't fault people. Our governors,
Sure. Sure.
people have no idea. And for your listeners who don't know, he may be your next president. So you need to know who he is, because he is handsome and smiley and dangerous. Um, Absolutely dangerous. So, and I have to work with him often. So,
Yeah, that is so hard, is just kind of navigating people. And not only that, but the balancing act of not letting their actions and reactions add to your value or take away from it,
yeah, yeah.
add to your calling or take away from it. I mean, it must be a challenge when somebody's reacting a certain way or acting a certain way, or not wanting to stick around. Would you say it comes down to feeling abandoned by people, feeling uncared for by people? How
Yeah.
would you narrow it down to, like, what does it feel like?
Well, I would say, I'll tell you what me and my counselor processed is that I have an unhealthy view of responsibility. So I go in 100% for people, and then my unhealthy expectation is that's what they're in it as well. And so I end up just getting upset because people aren't in it like that. I mean, how many pastors do you know have been at one church for 27 years? I mean, that doesn't happen a lot. Um, and I get it. People are hard, situations are tough, but we really feel like God's called us here. So I think it's really getting back to, my calling. God didn't call me because people are going to stay. God called me because he called me to stay. And so
Yeah.
it's really just getting back to, the original, um, calling 27 years ago. So
I'm just curious, do you have any history of one-sided relationships or abandonment, or, being loyal to somebody who wasn't so very loyal before the church?
yeah, I don't. I grew up in a pretty healthy family, so that's what we've been exploring. I think it's just kind of a coping mechanism that I've adopted over the 27 years in church. It's just something that's shown up in my adult life. But even as like a kid, I remember feeling responsible for my mom or my dad, but they weren't alcoholics. That's just something that was wired in me from an early age.
What's your
Um,
birth order?
a first. Yeah.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
kind of comes with the territory a little bit of feeling responsible and giving your all. So have you had to learn to limit what you give, limit your expectations? I know that sounds backwards, right? As a
Yeah.
pastor, like how can you limit what you give, right? But
Yep.
just boundaries wise,
Oh yeah.
have you learned what the importance of when to pull back? And if so, what has that looked like?
Yeah, well, it's not just me that needs to learn that. It's I have to teach my family that because I've led my family to not have good boundaries. And so you know, it's just something that we're trying to rework because when you start a church and you have no one, like you're all in with everyone and you're trying to reach everyone and grow the church. And I think with good reason, to share the gospel, to change people's lives. But what I think I've learned is, even Jesus, when he goes to the mountain to transform, he only takes 3 of the 12 with him. Even he had boundaries. In Revelation 22, even the new heavens and the new earth, there's a wall around the city, even in the new heaven and new earth. And so God still has boundaries. And
Right,
what I did is, I think the thinking, I'm an evangelist at heart. And so think of Luke 15. God abandons the 99 to get the one. Well,
right.
I think that's okay occasionally. That's a terrible way to live your life.
You're right,
So, it makes great for preaching. It's
right,
terrible. It's terrible to plant your life and drop everything that you have for the one all the time. And so that's what I would say is I had to unlearn that and just realize, okay, I have limits. Not everyone is safe. Now that Sandals is large, people, um, they want to get to know me because they think I'm influential, because I have status, and so I'm constantly now have to gauging, okay, why is this person wanting attention?
right.
And the bottom line is, most of the people that I interact with now, Deborah, I'm their pastor or I'm their boss. So
Right.
it's just a weird thing.
Okay,
So
so what does it look like then for pastors to have friends? Because it's not that easy to just be friends with someone in your congregation. Like you
yeah,
have a different role, right? You're shepherding people. So I could see easily that relationship that's supposed to be mutual
right.
becoming one-sided if it's
Yeah.
somebody in your congregation. So what does it look like for someone like you to have that healthy give and take relationship? And do you find that it has to come from outside the church, or have you been able to
Yeah.
find a way to do it from within?
Yeah, it's a great question. Years ago, and I'm not going to say his name because you would know his name. I sat down with a very famous pastor, and he drew on a piece of paper, and he said, "I want you to draw a line in the paper, and I want you to write church outside of church." And he said, "I want you to write down all of your friends, whether
Mhm.
they're in church or outside of church." And so I did it, and then he just told me, he said, "These people outside of the church, they're your only friends." And Deborah, I said, "I'm going to live to prove you to be wrong."
Wow.
And he's so right. He was so right because um, at the end of the day, you know, um, real friendship, like David and Jonathan in the Bible have, is not transactional. And
Right,
so, as a pastor, right, I preach a sermon, I give advice, I care, I do a funeral. It is transactional,
right.
even if I believe it's relational. And so, what I've had to do is I've had to divide my life into 3 categories. Is this person work? Is this
Hmm.
person, ministry? Because we're called to care for people, or are they a friend? And those are 3 different things. And and so my wife and I have really had to have that conversation. Okay, is this a ministry person in our life that matters?
Right,
We
right,
matter. We care about them. Is this a work person, or is
right,
this a friend? And what you realize is real quickly, your friendships are the people that you meet with really for the purpose of pleasure. I enjoy you, you enjoy me.
right.
We have a common vision.
You receive something from that
Yes.
relationship. You give, but you also receive. And in a healthy friendship, it should balance out.
Yep.
Whereas in ministry relationships, the percentage tips towards the giving
Yep.
and not so much the receiving.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem in Christian circles, to be honest, is we look at all relationships like discipleship relationships. So when they become one-sided, it's like, well, this is what God calls of us. And then we give and give and give in all of these relationships. And ultimately, we're like, why am I so empty? Why am I so burned out? Why am I so drained? because there's nobody set up around us to pour back into us. And we don't even
Yeah.
have that expectation of people.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I thought, and to be honest with you, out of pride, I would have said, I got an endless tank. So I can keep doing this, right? Because the Holy Spirit's going to empower me. Jesus has called me. And pridefully, I can do this. And then what I found is I can't. So,
Do you remember a time in the past 10 years when you felt like the most depleted or burnt out from specifically like people?
yeah. Yeah. So it was on my birthday, June 2nd of 2020, right after George Floyd happened. And I
Yeah,
had a huge conflict with one of my black friends.
yeah.
And I just remember on the phone saying, okay, so a white guy I don't know killed a black guy you don't know, but we're not friends anymore. Explain that to me. A 30-year friendship. And the world's gone crazy. People are more political. That politics is the new religion. I mean, it divides families, it divides friends. It's just crazy. And I just got real depressed and sad because what happened to George Floyd was terrible. I was disgusted by it, but it wasn't personal, but it wrecked a friendship that I had, and a 30-year friendship, Deborah, 30 years. And
So there's another example for you of that ledger of, okay, the second you're not pleased with me,
yeah,
you're gone.
yeah, yeah. Are you familiar with attachment style at all? Yeah.
Very,
So I'm what's it called? Dismissive avoidant, but I have a high pleasing category as well. So like, whatever I can do to make you happy. So I have to really watch that. And
very
then
accommodating.
I get exasperated really quickly. When it's like, look, man, I've spun all the plates, Deb. This is what I got, and you're still offended and upset. So, and really for me, I realized two things. One, I got to go to counseling, and what I learned in counseling is my job is to preach the gospel. It's people's job to listen to it and to be changed by it. And then I got to help people that want help, but that's it. But that's part of my work. It's not my whole life. And so that's the thing with ministry that's so weird. I think people that have jobs, right, they get, okay, I'm done. With ministry, it's really hard to know
It
when am I
is so
clocking out.
hard,
Yeah.
so hard. That's why I'm
So
seeing the highest rates of burnout in people in ministry. It's like, when does the job end? Like,
yeah,
does it? Can you even say the job ends if you're doing work for the Lord? And that's where it gets confusing for so many people.
yeah,
So you've really had to be on a journey of essentially learning, number one, to put limits, and
yeah,
number two, to receive. So to limits in my mind is, if we're a tank, we talked about that tank, oh, I'll never get
yeah.
empty. And then you realize, wait a second, I have human capacity. So boundaries and limits are like plugging up the holes, right?
Right.
To reserve your energy. But then the next step is
Yeah,
filling up that tank. So you've had to learn to set boundaries where you need to set them, and then also to set yourself up to a place of actually asking and receiving, and learning who's safe to ask and receive from, and increasing your expectations of those people. Like, hey, I actually need this from you. It's not
yeah.
just pouring out, pouring out. Um, what did that look like for you?
Well, I think it was just, honest. I mean, one of the things that was hard is to have a conversation with my wife and say, okay, we don't have real friends.
Yeah,
So, like, that's a hard thing to say. We're surrounded by people, but we're all alone. So, what does that look like? And so, just really praying to God and saying, God, put people in our lives, and we have a weird job, so it's got to be people that get us.
yeah,
And so just meeting with other pastors in other states at other churches, connecting with their stories. And so the last 4 years, I really feel like we've really developed and nurtured friendships. And I would actually say there are friends that I can call outside of my church. And I still have people that I would say I'm really close to inside my church. I don't want somebody from my church that's a friend. And I have two specifically that I'm thinking about. If they heard this podcast, I wouldn't want them to be offended, because I
yeah,
would definitely say, if Tammy and I left Sandals tomorrow, we would still be friends. Like
right.
this, like we're still vacationing together, connecting, and so we have some of those. But those are really, to be honest with you, friends that worked outside of the church that over time began working at the church, but
Yeah.
we have a 20-year friendship prior to them working at the church.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. So for someone where boundaries is not your natural language, what does that look like for you to learn to say no, set limits, um, really limit what and how much you're giving, when, to who, and how has that looked like for you personally, but also for how you have kind of protected your family?
yeah, well, a good friend of mine um, gave me a book, a beautiful word. Have you read that book?
I haven't.
It's no. So the book is a beautiful word, and the word is no.
Yeah,
And
my
just
favorite
how,
word.
yeah, just how you have to learn to say that and do
Right,
those things. And I think as a pastor, it's just really, really hard. Like if most pastors were 100% honest on your show, here's what they would say is they feel compelled to lie about why they can't do something more than simply saying no.
right. More than
Like,
saying, this isn't good for me.
yeah,
That I can't, this isn't healthy for me. It's like,
yeah,
well, my wife has a thing, and
yeah, yeah,
versus I just need to stay home and rest.
yeah. I need a
Yeah.
day off.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, but no. And that's been hard. And people do get offended, Deborah, and they do walk away. They do leave your church. They do
You're right.
nowadays. Here's the problem. Nowadays they leave your church, but they don't leave your life because on social media they're blogging, they're posting,
Right.
they're um, posting their new church and their new pastor who's perfect and how they've never grown more. And I mean it's just there's no escape from it. And so that's what I tell my kids in the 80s. What I felt like growing up is there was an escape. Like I could leave school, I could leave church, I could
Right.
turn off the TV. My kids can't do that. It's constantly, coming at them and it's not good. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, when it comes to boundaries, we talked about you said you had a pretty safe childhood.
yeah, yeah, I had great parents. I thought the best parents on earth. Now they're,
I
they're
wonder
not.
if part of that has to do with why you had such low boundaries. You
Mhm.
didn't really need boundaries.
Yeah.
Like it was a safe setting. It's like you don't have to be on high alert because
Hmm.
there's no need to be on high alert.
Yeah.
So you
No.
live your life without boundaries because boundaries are only needed for protection, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so I don't really need boundaries. And you kind of live your life almost in a way naive of the fact that, wait a second, you can't trust everybody.
Right. No.
Life isn't safe. Christians aren't always healthy. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, like I have not lived with boundaries for so long. I don't even know what that looks like because you never really had a purpose for them in childhood.
Yeah. No,
And
totally. I think that's a great take. I never thought about that. And the other thing is what my mom did, what I would say is, she's a mama bear. She didn't just provide boundaries, but structure.
yeah,
And so, I was very safe growing up, and we were very protected from the junk at church. It never came home.
were your
My parents,
parents in ministry?
yes, my dad was a pastor,
Wow,
and
that's
so I
really
read his doctorate.
fascinating.
I read his doctorate, and I had no idea of all the things he was going through. So I was
Wow.
protected from that. So
Right, right. And for good and for not so good, because
yeah,
then
yeah,
you never really learned to go in there on high alert,
yeah,
to go in there with your boundaries, your fences ready to let certain people in and keep certain people out. It kind of reminds me of like, I've worked with clients who say, oh, my parents never fought.
yeah,
Yeah, right. Of course they did. They just never saw it because their parents kept it behind closed doors. But then when that couple faced conflict, they didn't totally know how to navigate it because they never saw it modeled. Like, here's the hard stuff and here's how you navigate it. So, for good, you were not exposed to the hard stuff and you were protected and you felt safe and secure. But for bad, you kind of were thrown into the world without much direction and protection of like,
yeah,
okay, what do you do with all this hard stuff when it comes up?
yeah. No, it's a great take. Absolutely.
But at least your kids have learned the hard way. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, you got to protect yourself. Not everybody's safe, even
yeah.
in church.
Yeah, we have very, very real conversations with our kids and very honest conversations. And I'm not a dad who needs to have done it all perfect. That doesn't offend me to hear that, I made mistakes or I hurt their feelings or they wish I would have done something different. I mean, I welcome that. That doesn't bother me at all. Like I mean, it makes me sad if I've, done something, to hurt them. And my daughter, we were doing worst childhood experiences, and my daughter's worst childhood experience was one of my favorite experiences with her. It was like dad 101 failure. So I would take her surfing with me, and I thought she loved it as a kid, and she was traumatized by it because she thought she was going to be eaten by a shark, and
Yeah.
she would have nightmares the night before and the day after.
Oh
And I'm sitting there
no.
going,
You're
I'm
like,
so
this is the
sorry.
best day ever.
Yeah, I thought it was the greatest day of our lives, and you're like, she's just frozen in terror in the ocean. So I was just like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Let me ask you this. What has it looked like for you to commit to filling yourself up? I call it soul care.
Yeah, yeah,
As I'm in the process of writing a book that comes out in September called Soul Care, and it's kind of examining the rhythms of Jesus and how he cared for his soul, because some people think it's unchristian.
yeah, yeah,
So I just want to ask you, as a pastor right now in this season of life, like, this is such a rich season of ministry for you. Like, you've
yeah,
been through the hard stuff, you've learned hard lessons. You still have a good 20 years to go if
yeah.
if
Thank you,
you want
Deborah.
to go that
Yeah,
far, right?
yeah,
But now it's a matter of, how do we make these years your best years? It's by filling up, staying filled, so
yeah.
that you can pour out so naturally. So what have you learned or are learning about what Pastor Matt Brown needs to be filled?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are really three things, well, four things from me. So, and not all my pastor friends agree with this, but I am a big believer in my quiet time is not my sermon time. It just isn't. So I'm reading through the Bible every day, one chapter in the Old Testament, one chapter in the New Testament. And I'm not saying I can't pick something out of that for the message that
Sure.
week, but
Right.
that's not why I'm looking there. So,
Right.
um, so time with God. The next would be exercise. I have just learned, that's part of my healing journey that I talk about in my book, Every Day a Miracle. Exercise is just not a negotiable for me. It's
Yeah.
something I'm in such a mentally, spiritually stressful job. If I don't exert something physically, I'm going to save that up, and it's going to be explosive somewhere else. So it comes out
Right.
in an unhealthy way. So, so,
And
and
not only that, but exercise and movement literally releases cortisol from your body, the stress
yeah,
chemical. It literally releases it and then gives your serotonin and dopamine a chance to do what they're supposed to do. So research has shown that regular exercise can be just as effective as an antidepressant
yeah,
if done regularly.
yeah,
Even if it's just something as simple as walking. I feel like people really underestimate the power of movement in their mental health.
yeah. No, I agree. No. So, next would be fun. That's a huge thing for me. So what am I doing? And so here's how I measure this.
Yeah.
It has to be something where I'm not thinking about work.
Hmm.
So surfing, snowboarding, um, running. Sometimes I get in my head, so I don't. I
Right.
can come back from a run upset.
Right.
So,
So
you
you're
know,
going to have to like be listening to something really distracting if you're going to go on a run, something that's
yeah.
not going to give your mind time to wander.
And a big thing for me is learning. Right now, I'm reading "Strength to Strength" by Robert Brooks. So I don't know if you've read that, but it's
Mm-mm.
really challenging me to. It's basically a book about post 50. So I turned 50. So what do you do as your body's changing, your skills are changing? How do you basically finish well and relationally healthy? So I love to be challenged through reading. Um, and then the last thing for me, what I know that was four. That's four things.
Fun. And then was that for quiet time, exercise, fun? Did I miss one?
Yeah, and reading. So
Reading.
reading things that challenge me and stimulate my mind.
Got it.
So and for me, I'm not a person that likes to read like fantasy. Like
Yeah, me neither.
my daughter loves like any fantasy novel, whatever. I would rather, go to the dentist. Um, I want something that's challenging me, refining me, growing me.
Yeah.
That's what I'm drawn to. So
So you mentioned your counseling journey. When did you get to a point? And I want to highlight this because we have a lot of pastors and leaders that listen along.
yeah.
And oftentimes you're listening for your congregation. Like, oh yeah, this would be so great for so and so. This would be a great message.
Hmm.
But I want the pastors and leaders who are listening to listen for you for a minute. Okay.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell me, where do you feel like you got in your ministry journey that you felt it was time for some counsel, some counseling?
Yeah. Well, sorry for the shameless plug for the book, but chapters 10, 11, and 12 are the complex nature of healing. So my book
Hmm.
is on miracles, trusting the God who heals from the inside out. And really, it's my journey to, so many people are asking God to change them. And so, I think we all know what we want God to do, but what is God asking us to do? And so for me, there's really three things that I had to explore. So spiritual health. And I'll just tell you, Deborah, I was under spiritual attack. Some things are spiritual, and it's not always the boogeyman, but sometimes it is. And I was a fool. And so I talk about that, how to identify the enemy when he's at work in your life. The next is emotional, dealing with just the wounds that you've picked up. So I talk about that, and healing the heart is a journey. It is. I
Yeah, it
wish,
really
I
is.
wish that people could come forward for prayer and I could say a prayer, and I think they feel better, but they're not better.
You're
So, and
right.
then the last thing is just really identifying some mental thinking that's wrong. We're all trapped in our own heads, and
Right.
so what a therapist does, oftentimes for me, is repeats back to me the dysfunctional thing that I've just said out loud as truth.
Right. You're
So,
right.
but when I hear you say it, I go, "Oh, Deborah, that's whack." Like,
Yeah.
don't believe that. But
Yeah.
and you would say, well, Matt, that's what you just said, and I wrote it down. Do you want to reclarify that? And so I can't tell you how many times a therapist has helped me listen to my own negative think, my own faulty processing. Here's a huge thing: false categorizing. I do this or this, and it's
Right.
like, or you
Right.
know, we can do option three over here that's obvious to you, but I have narrowed the choices down to two things. And I think a lot of Christians give God these either or choices. And it's like, well, you know, I could do this or this. And what my therapist always says is, or you could learn to change.
Yeah. I love
You know,
that.
yeah. So and my therapist, Mark, he's a great guy. He's from England. So the British accent soothes the
It makes
sharpness
them
of his
sound even
critique.
smarter
Yeah.
too. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. Our emotional wounds. I talk a lot about the template of trauma that we pick
Yeah.
up along the journey of life, and we live out of it, believe out of it, think out of it, feel out of it without even realizing that it's laid over our life until somebody else is like, wait a second. Like let's pull this template away and see what we've got left. And what does it look like to then begin replacing that template with the template of God's truth, and like
Yeah.
seeing where we've gone wrong in our belief system and our security, even a belief as simple as I'll never run out because I have the Holy Spirit,
Right.
or I don't need boundaries because people are safe. Even those things that sound so positive and good can be
Yeah.
unhealthy thinking that gets us into trouble, depending on the family dynamic that we came from. It sometimes when people think toxic thinking, they think of all this horrible stuff. I'm just bleepity bleep beep. But that's not always it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a toxic positivity of
Yeah.
just like seeing the world through a rose-colored lens, and then and learning the hard way. Wait a second. Like I can't just trust people. Trust is something that has to be earned.
Yeah.
So just things that I think you're right. You don't always realize you've taken into life, and you're living out of them until somebody can help you pull back the layers and see
Mm.
what's happening underneath the surface. Well, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. I always appreciate my conversations with you and your teachability. That's
Oh yeah.
one thing that I really love about you, is that you don't come across as a know-it-all.
Well, that's good.
And you come across as somebody who is on the journey of healing and is like, I want to bring people with me with what I'm learning. I want to bring people with me in the journey of emotional health, spiritual health, mental
Yeah.
health. Somebody who's excited about what God is teaching them, and that overflows into the lives of others. And I just think that's a really great positioning for a lead pastor of a church.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm just grateful for your heart and the work that God continues to do in you and through you. I'm grateful for God's protection and what He's taught you
Yeah.
over the last few years. And I really believe that He wants to protect that tank
Yeah.
because you have so much more to pour out.
Yeah.
You cannot afford for your tank to get empty in order to do the work that God has called you to do. You cannot fill others up if you're not filled.
Yeah. Amen.
And so, my prayer for you is that as you remain filled and plug up the holes and set limits and boundaries and say no and protect yourself and protect your family, that God would fill you up to overflowing.
Hmm.
And that overflow would just splash all over your church and the members of your congregation and what God's going to do in you and your family over the next at least 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. I love it. Thank you so much.
Where can people learn more about you and your book?
They can get it on Amazon. Every Day a Miracle book. I almost said .com, but that's the book site. Every Day a Miracle book, and it's trusting the God who heals from inside and out. And it's just kind of my healing journey that really came out of kind of the just awareness of my wounds, my deep wounds that I had occurred in my life through ministry.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us say, well, we hear about miracles in other people's lives, and we go, okay, well, God, when do I get to experience a miracle in my life? And that's what the book is about. It's about taking a journey. And what I say is the storm is never where we want to be, but sometimes that's exactly where Jesus wants us to be. And that's where we find out who he is, the great healer. And so it's been a great book. It's you've written. I love your books. Um, um, it's been an interesting thing about how and people say the same thing that you're saying is you're so vulnerable, real, and I don't sound like a know-it-all. And it's because I would say I don't feel like a know-it-all. I feel like I'm still learning. I feel like I should know more. I should have learned more by this time. Um, but yeah, it's just a book on the miraculous, and I think that's so important that we experience the miraculous, because I know, like you're motivated by change. When you see a client or a patient, when they get it and their marriage is saved, their heart is healed, they're able to live again and smile again. And that just changed lives is just why I'm in what I do. And I just remember the Lord saying, well, your ministry too, Matt.
Yeah.
Like I didn't call you to minister to others. I called you to minister to you. And I just was like, ooh, and so
What a
just
lesson.
yeah,
What a lesson. It's funny you mentioned that. Just last year I had this trip planned. Usually my trips are like ministry trips for the most
yeah,
part. Once a year we'll go on family vacation, but there was this extended vacation that my husband and I were taking for 2 weeks away from the kids, no ministry, no work.
yeah,
I was feeling a little bit guilty and kind of
yeah,
processing out loud with my mom, and she was like, you know what? This is a ministry trip. It's a ministry to you because
yeah,
God is allowing you this opportunity to fill up. And I'm like, you know what? I'm holding on to that. Like
yeah, yeah.
how often do we need to remember that if
Amen.
if this ministry
Yeah.
goes down,
Yes. Right.
everything goes down.
Yeah.
And so many people become collateral damage.
Hmm.
You can't afford not to minister to yourself and keep yourself healthy.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I mean, and I hear this all the time from Christian leaders is we don't see ourselves as ministry. Even Jesus it's your next book. Even Jesus took time away. I need to get away, from these people that he had handpicked to be his
Yeah.
disciples.
And you would think with 3 years, like,
Yeah.
okay, I got 3 years. I have so much I need to get done in 3 years. He didn't live his life that way. He
Right.
was so balanced and meticulous and it just gets me fired up to just see
Yeah.
how healthy he was and how he wants the same for us. Like life abundant should not be just for the people we're ministering to.
Hmm.
Life abundant is for us
Yeah.
overflowing into the people that God has called us to serve. So I pray that over you, Pastor Matt,
Amen. Yeah.
and your
Amen.
family. And
Yeah.
I just really appreciate your time with me today.
Thank you so much.